Welcome to episode 36 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week, we're going to be discussing a 1982 film, Diner, directed by Barry Levinson. And what was I say? Oh, this film it takes place in the 1950s. It's my
What
pick of the
city?
week, Baltimore. But I was going to say it was my pick of the week because we've recently been having a lot of conversations about, I guess, men as they transition to different
Just
phases.
growing up.
Yeah, transition of life. And even though like time has passed, it's not the 1950s anymore. I remember watching the first 30 minutes and being like, a lot of this like joke and banter, okay, like things have changed, but like the spirit of this joke and banter has not. And also like the kind of like the anxieties of maturing from like I guess for us is more like our mid 20s to 30s, but I guess back then it probably been like teenagers to mid 20s because I think people were getting married older.
I think it's like basically like what you're supposed to do right after college.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's my introduction. I'm curious to like, obviously the style and the tone is different than what we've been doing recently. I'm curious what your, after watching it, what was your initial takeaways were?
I mean, it was good. Really, the film centers around a bunch of a group of guys who they're obviously in their like I would say mid to early 20s, and a lot of them are at different stages in life. In terms, some of the people are married already. Some of the people are like newly engaged. Some are single, but they're all sort of transitioning, and it creates some interesting sort of conversations and dynamics, right? Especially with one with one of the characters who's engaged and makes his fiance take a football questionnaire, which made me laugh so hard. But yeah, there's a lot of hesitation about sort of transitioning into the next phase of these people's lives, and I think that a lot of the stuff, right, is kind of timeless, and that it resonates with a lot of people once you start getting to that point in your life as a dude. I can't necessarily speak to the female experience because it's slightly different, but it was interesting just seeing their dynamics, and I think a lot of guys once they get into their late 20s to 30s today, they really start experiencing that, and even older.
Yeah. Just to, I guess, defend our podcast a little bit. When we say men, we mean men of obviously of a certain archetype. Not meaning like they have to be,
It's no. We're speaking generalities here.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is not everyone, but I would say a lot of people when they're looking to settle down, that's really what this film was trying to allude to.
Yeah, that's
so
why
transitioning into the next phase of like actually settling down and getting married.
And to your point, and I know it was an ensemble cast. I think the character you were mentioning earlier, I think it was Eddie.
I can't remember. Yeah.
And Eddie was the one that had the anxieties around, getting married. And we discovered later why, and we'll get into that. But yeah, I do see your point around like it focuses on marriage, number one. But I think also number two is like you said, like, career, right? What's your what are you going to be serious about in your career, right? Like like I think I actually forgot his name, but the character that had he was doing the gambling, the side bets.
Right.
His character seemed to represent that. Like when
you're talking Boogie, because he was in law school and he was going to take things seriously.
Yeah, like when are you gonna get like, you're no longer, you can't be this flamboyant, playboy basically. When you're gonna get serious about life. So like we have each of the characters in different ways. I think they're well written in the sense that they kind of represent a different kind of like, archetype of like maybe what the hiccups are when you go through life, right? Like, when are you going to get serious about your career? Oh yeah, when are you going to get married? Or others like when are you going to start? Like I think with Kevin Bacon's character, I think his like, I think what I got out of his character, I think his name was Fenwick. Let me just double check that. Yeah. Was kind of like when you're going to start, being accountable for your actions, because he seems to be kind of like this jokester, right? So like you had kind of all the archetypes, which is why I like this film. And like, I thought it would give us a lot of speaking points, because I think we can also see this with people we're growing up with, and we won't divulge names, but we can basically pull examples from archetypes we see that are very cross-cutting, and like
sure.
We have people we know that are not, or they are settling down. Like you probably know people. You have others that seem aimless. I probably know an individual who's probably there, and others who are, or just delusional, and they're never gonna grow up. But yeah, we kind of see it all, and like we'll get deeper to the characters and certain scenes. But what did you think of the cast? Like I was interested to see that like there's like people that were like they went on to make TV shows and other movies, like Kevin Bacon's one, but all these actors like they were young at this point in their careers, and they're all like it's very rare to have such an ensemble cast who would have obviously longevity in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up in the '80s, so it was interesting seeing these actors in as their younger selves, like early on in their careers. Like, yeah, you were saying there's Kevin Bacon, there's also Mickey Rourke, and I'm not too familiar with certain, but I know these people have gone on to have like pretty good careers in Hollywood. So it was interesting to see, and I think a lot of their energies played very well with one another in this film. Like it seemed kind of natural, like the typical, especially for that time, the kind of dude banter. Like a lot of the jokes and things they make references to would not necessarily fly today.
Yeah, they wouldn't. And I know before we get into themes, is there any specific scenes that you want to start with? Like, I think with this movie, we can probably pick our favorite scenes and then talk about, themes and stuff and, connecting it to our today life. But.
Oh, well, probably one of the more controversial scenes was obviously when they make a bet with Bookie with what happens in the movie theater. I don't know if you want to get into that or not.
The pop, you can explain that. Yeah, I know that's the scene that pops. Popcorn.
It pops. At a certain point, what the scene we're referring to is that Boogie is a just compulsive, obsessive gambler. He will bet on anything, and it's just a terrible attribute of his character in this movie. But he ends up betting with his friends that someone he's going to a first date with, that he could get her to. How do I frame this in a very PC way? He could get her to basically, I would say, feel him out. And they're like, there's no way this girl's like conservative. There's no way that would happen. And so what he ends up doing is putting his popcorn on his lap and exposing himself, and she unknowingly did. Now that is wild because that would that's not even cool back then. That would never be okay today because that is sexual harassment. Because his date was just an unknowing participant of what he was doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that. But I just thought it was interesting because I was like, if that scene were to be included in a film, there would definitely be a lot of outrage today, and for good reason.
Yeah, it was definitely over the top. I think
it was most over the top.
I think it was definitely in there because actually it shows you how I think even though I think
shows you how society's progressed.
Yeah, I think in the 80s it would have been questionable, but because this movie's set in the 50s,
I think people were more accepting to that because of the time frame.
Yeah, and also that's that was the time frame, and I think it's a clear contrast to how our society has changed because now that would be, you would probably be outed pretty strongly, and
Oh, like that! It would be all over Twitter. You'd be done. You'd never hear from this dude again.
Yeah,
for good reason, really. That was just, it was so over the top of a premise.
Yeah, and I, again, just to extrapolate a little bit, is that what I got not that scene, but many others, is that maybe this hasn't changed as much, is that because men have to socialize differently because locker room talk and tough talk, they kind of, either for good or for worse, probably for worse, they kind of figure it out through, I'm going to say acting out, right? This is clearly something that he thought it was going to be funny and cool. And like you said, taking the bets, banter talk. But obviously if you think it through, it's kind of disturbing.
Very much so.
So, but I think this scene, I'm glad you brought it up because I think with this scene, what ran through my mind is that I've also seen odd behavior from men, either because they're super misogynistic or they're just really on the other spectrum where they're really they don't know how to articulate or deal with other men or the other gender,
Mm-hmm.
I think with Boogie's case, I think he's just like you said, he's just this flamboyant playboy, so nothing seems off bearish. Even later when he's he pulls back in the end, with his friend's wife. We're jumping around, but Beth. We'll get to that scene in the when he's with her in the room, right? Because he takes that bet that he can bed Carol, but like that's not working out. And he's able to pull back, but so that later scene shows me that like he's not that awkward. It's just that like he just doesn't.
He doesn't care.
He doesn't care, right? Like he's just like like this girl is clearly more interested in him than he's in her, right? Like that's pretty obvious when he gives her that lame excuse of like it was an accident or something, or you just
dude, it was the most outrageous excuse ever. How he was just uncomfortable, and so he needed to make himself less uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was so bad, and that excuse only flies, in my opinion, in my experience. So I'll preface with that. When the girl is more like she's really into the guy, she'll make more excuses. Like this was like somebody she was like iffy on or whatever, dead in the water, or you're in jail. It's but you could tell, like I gotta say, the subtleties in the acting in this movie were good, even for the characters that I think that I don't know who they are, like if they had careers outside this movie, but yeah, that scene popped. I would have I was gonna start with Fenwick's like joyride and him faking the car accident. It kind of sets the tone for the movie that it's part serious but part also like men. I don't want to use that line all the time, but boys will be boys. So
a lot of what was considered acceptable back at that point in time it's changed, especially with the whole Me Too movement for like good reason, right? So a lot of the behaviors are trying to sort of cut out and make just not normalized.
Yeah, but I will say that where there's not much coverage. And this is, like I said, I think the male to female has changed dramatically. But I suspect that sometimes male to male has not been really deconstructed in our society to the same.
What do you mean exactly? Like, elaborate a little bit.
The male to male banter. Like we were just talking about this a month ago. Like I came across an old high school acquaintance, and he's still traumatized by his high school experiences.
Can you elaborate a little bit? Oh, I know who I'm.
Yeah, and like if I didn't come across,
that was borderline bullying, though.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
I know what you're talking about.
That's that gray area, though, right? Like, I don't think a lot of the people who were doing that back then saw themselves as the big bully, right? Like, I think.
Yeah, but they were.
They were, but I think like bullying. I think that's what I'm getting at. That bullying in many ways is like is male. Unfortunately, it's kind of like male socialization, where it's like the strong, like you either put up with it or fight back, or it gets you.
Yeah, I mean, males are generally more, I guess, like physical and confrontational like that.
And there is anti-bullying campaigns, and I've seen some, but they tend to focus on, unfortunately, what I think is like becoming our main focus in our society, like
social media bullying.
Most not just social media, but I mean like race, gender, stuff like that. Well, like I think unfortunately, an Asian American, like a person who's Black, Latino, like they can be they can perpetuate this as much as others.
We're gonna go on a little bit of a side tangent, but what's interesting, at least in the last, I would say 7 to 8 years of bullying research, is that rates among depression of, I think, preteen and teenage women. So both male and female rates of depression in preteens and teens has increased over the last like 6 to 8 years, I think. But it's way higher for even women than it is for dudes. And part of that is because the prevalency of bullying online is just higher for women than it is for men. And if you want that, you can just look at Jonathan Haidt's research. Quick little plug. Pretty good social science researcher from NYU.
Yeah, I think the online thing is like in my mind is a bit tad separate. For some reason, I do see that like women are attacked a little more online.
Well, it's because of part of the. Honestly, it's a little bit of the difference in the way that bullying occurs between males and females. Males tend to be more bully in terms of confrontation or in terms of physicality. Like you hear people giving each other like wedgies or like bullying in terms of that for dudes. Whereas for a lot of women, how they tend to do it as, or like specifically preteen and teenage girls, it's more done through like character assassination and things like that. And social media is just suited for that that type of medium.
Yeah, and it still connects. I mean, like I said, I'm focusing because it's a movie about guys, like the male social.
Sorry, that was just a quick little tangent because we were talking about bullying.
Yeah, because you could argue in this film there is a bit of nobody's like that bad in the movie, but there's there's enough banter where there's like you could see how like it can get into bullying, especially how like Fenwick is kind of like treated and like as the jokester of the group, and like how they kind of like don't view him on the same par as like Boogie and like other characters. But yeah, I was just connecting it where like I think my main point mainly was just like the socialization of men. I think there is research and writing, but in our mainstream culture, it's just not discussed as much as I think female to male relations, which is a little bit more I think transparent when it's like really egregious. But I look back now and I can probably start thinking of examples that are like one could argue was like not the best. So I'll leave it at that. But I think, and this is like you said, like it affects somebody throughout their life, right? Like that's the thing that I think is also not like discussed enough. But moving on, I think there's other scenes that I think are really good too. But I'll let you take the floor if you want to jump into something specific.
I'm trying to think because this movie it's linear, but it's just a bunch of scenes of like. How do I describe this? It was almost just like a day in the life of these guys. What did you think about it?
It's a slice of life film. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely like a slice of life kind of movie. It was interesting, and it was meant to be a comedy, right? Oh, I wanted. So I know I brought this up earlier. So what I will say is I found it, like I said earlier, hilarious that he made. You said it was Eddie asked that Elise. Basically his fiance take a football quiz, right? And she couldn't cheat, and if she didn't get above, I think it was a 65%, then he wouldn't marry her. I just thought that was hilarious. And quick little side note, I could see you doing that as an Arsenal quiz.
No, I would never do that.
Yeah, you would. I could totally see that.
I would never do that. Maybe
like,
49.
No, you would be like, who is the greatest manager of all time? And she would have known you'd be like, Arsene Wenger. Come on. How do you not know this?
Yeah, dude. What was the record in 1989? Yeah. But
yeah, you'd be like, what is the only Premier League team to never lose a game? Or
to go on a little.
Didn't Liverpool also not lose a game?
No, they never. No. The only team that's ever been undefeated is
Arsenal.
No, and also this team in like the 1920s. There's only 2 teams.
Arsenal. Anyway.
49 games unbeaten. But anyway.
That was just so over the top. And like a lot of the scenes in this movie were just so ridiculous that I could never. Maybe someone has done that to like their fiance, but I just couldn't. If you or I ever did that, that would not go over well. You'd end up forever alone.
Yeah, I mean it's like it's definitely like my sense is that you gotta remember that this movie was made in 1982, and this I believe is before the Colts actually moved out of Baltimore. And I think what people forget now, because we're used to like the modern era with the Ravens, this is a little sports tangent, is that the Colts, it was a huge deal when the Colts left Baltimore for where did they go?
For Indianapolis, right?
Yeah, Indianapolis, yeah. And because like the Baltimore Colts were actually like one of the marquee teams, right? They had like Johnny Unitas, all these guys. So like I'm not surprised that these guys, this ensemble cast representing like the traditional 1950s male, that they were all huge like Colts fans, and like they took it very seriously. Yeah, I did think the quiz was over the top, but I think that, to your point, I think that was inserted to show you how much of bros these guys are, and B, for Baltimore, how important that team was. It's part of the culture.
Yeah.
And moving was huge.
I wanted to ask you. Sorry, sort of moving on, because that was just a silly little tangent. What did you think of the dynamic between Shreve and his wife?
I thought it was still very relevant topic for today. You know, I know you're talking about the record scene, which is I think on YouTube and highly played because I think a lot of people hit this in their relationships at one point. That like, well, I think for you and I,
where people feel hurt because their partner doesn't show interest in their interests.
Yeah, I think you and I I think it affects people who. I think we missed that boat of like having that kind of danger because like now at this point in my life, I would try to like get to know the person and hopefully they get to know me. But like to your point, right?
They did it very quickly.
Yeah, the context here is that they were high school sweethearts, and this happened a lot, right? Back even now, it still happens.
But were they high school sweethearts because she went out with Boogie?
Yeah, but that was like remember they mentioned she did that one like a few like just a little bit, and then like I guess the rest of high school was with Shrivi. I think that's what the scene you're talking about the scene in the car, right? Yeah. Yeah. They talked about that for a second. And then she, because her marriage is on the rocks a little bit, she, you know, tempts Boogie, but he actually has enough character to say no. But
yeah, that was shocking.
Going back to the
dude, that was so wild that he was going to try to win a bet by betting Carol, and really, Shri was in the closet. Yeah, and in reality, he was gonna basically cheat on with his wife, and Shri wouldn't even know of it. Yeah, she'd be discussing that whole scenario. Was just like, what are you doing? This man Boogie was playing with absolute fire.
Yeah, he was
absolute fire.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Boogie is my guy. Dude, fire or something like that. But anyways,
dude, I was like, what are you doing, bro?
Going back to the diss record scene, where in the context is that
go back to
Shrivi has like I mean, I've met people like this. They're very particular about like whatever their one hobby, right? The record's got to be in the right order. He likes to hear music, you know.
Yeah, it's like you and anime.
Yeah, but I'm good now. Like I haven't watched anime in a while, dude. I would say it's me.
Don't you have an Excel list?
I don't have an Excel list. I have my anime list. But anyways, it's a website, guys. Use it. Okay, I don't want to get off tangent here, but basically, like Beth, she's not interested, right? She moves the records around. She's not really respectful of his like niche hobby, which again, like maybe she's not into it, but like there's that fine line in relationships where you kind of respect the other person's boundaries a little bit, even if you are in a relationship. Mm-hmm. So like when you go in like full forward, right? Like you know what you're getting into, like you don't, say, oh, this is my deal breaker, right? But the way that the relationship was shown to us, because it was not really as described, there was no long dialogue, but it was kind of like they dated in high school, and then this is often 1950s culture, right? Like, the next step was let's just get married, right? We're not gonna meet. Maybe we'll meet other people, but like I'm not getting younger. Remember, this is when like people are more age conscious when they married too, right? Mm-hmm. And they do that, and I think we've discussed this offline. Like they have both started realizing that outside of being together, right? That's what they define their relationship as. We're together, right? It's not like, oh, we share this hobby. Oh, we did this stuff. Like it's just like, oh, we're together. We're married. Like you hear that it's often bad, right? Because there's no friendship. Right. There's not even like a common like, oh, we survive this tough period. Like even if it's a trauma, which is not saying it's healthy, but you see some marriages sustain because they fled a country together, or they survived a traumatic experience. Not saying that's the way to go. Friendship is always the way to go, but there's nothing really binding them, right? There's not, and they both what I like about this, their two characters is they both articulate that, right? Like Beth, she opens up to Boogie about it, and Shrivi opens up to. Does he open up to Boogie about it too? Yeah, I think they both open up to the same person. Yeah. But yeah, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this topic. So what's your bigger philosophical take on relationships and marriage on that?
Okay. I don't know if I have a take. I just thought it was interesting because, especially at that point in time in the 50s. And I think it's it's interesting, right? Because at that point in time, it was not uncommon for people to marry their high school sweethearts, start a family. All to realize, you haven't really grown as a person. A lot of these people haven't necessarily found themselves, or they don't really know their partner as well. So I think the divorce rate, I haven't looked up the exact statistic in a while, but for like people who like got married from like 18 to 21, it was pretty high. And I think like the sweet spot in terms of marriages that seem to be as a percentage like the most stable people that meet from like, I want to say it's like 26 to 31, so somewhere within that range. So I think there's a trap, like at that point, of people marrying someone who is like their high school sweetheart, all to know, well, I don't really know this person because you haven't really gone to college, you haven't sort of had any experiences as an adult, and so that leads to a lot of traps because then you're married to this person you don't. And yeah, you haven't. They haven't really found themselves, and you haven't really found yourself, and things that may have mattered to you, you don't realize that your partner doesn't really like. But then I think in today's day and age, we have the opposite trap of people waiting too long and not wanting to compromise on anything, and then they end up miserable. But like both extremes are not good. It was just interesting seeing that contrast.
No, I agree. In today's society is probably leaning the other direction. I think
very much the other.
To say, I want to like add on to your point a little bit is that like in my perspective, what I see is that often the mistake people make, in my opinion, is like you often meet people through obviously the social circles you have you use a lot, right? So school's a big one, right? Whatever, after school club is another one, right? Let's say you're going to high school and you're now in the disc golf club, right? You're going to meet people that way. And then you're obviously going to feel attracted to people and et cetera, right? I think the issue when you marry too young or you rush into it is that like you haven't, to your point about like, I know you said a point about college and stuff. How I would phrase it is
you don't have enough life experience to me, right? And I think it's because of so that when you get married and you just have too high level of immaturity, I don't think that's a good recipe. Yeah. That's just me
what I was gonna say, like a really specific point. I'm not a dating guru like other people, but is that like you haven't been with that person outside of that structure, right? So let's say you are in college and you think you found the one or whatever, right? When you leave college, that's your first real test of like, okay, we're not in the structure anymore, right? We're both living in an apartment. You have your career ambitions here, my career ambitions are there, and obviously there's people that make it work. I mean, we know somebody that their younger brother did make it work, but they did like have to adjust, right? And that's kind of like the trick, like what was I saying, like you have to be able to juggle that, like when you're in this confined environment, whether that's like in a campus or in like an office or whatever, like you're interacting with this person a lot, and yeah, that's how you can get like a gauge and a good initial runway. But what happens when like that moves away, right? Like that person leaves the job, or that person's no longer in your social unit, right? They leave your school, they leave the area, So that's where it's like that's my point about like life. Like to add on to your life experience, I'm just being really specific on like that. Sometimes just gets people, and I think a lot of people don't think of that. They're like, oh, we'll be always in this kind of place and time. When one thing we always know is that change is constant, right? So that's the challenge.
People change, dude. You grow.
Yeah, that's the challenge. Good.
No, and it was. Speaking of like some like a YouTube page that both you and I follow quite a bit, like there was a conversation I was listening to with some dude who was on Abba and Preach. If you guys don't know this YouTube page, go check it out. There's going to be a lot of references today, but some dude was talking about how he's been married for 21 years. And he was talking about like the 4 things that really like can screw up, like in his opinion, like a marriage, because he's been married for 21, has 2 twins. He's like, it's a lot of work. He's like, but really what you see like a lot of like relationships fail is when people become super defensive. And he's like, you hold contempt for your partner. And he listened to a couple. It was actually like really good. I was like, dang. I was like, this guy was just like preaching facts. And he's like, dude, he's like, what a lot of people just don't want to like acknowledge. It's not just about you. Especially when you have kids, it's just a responsibility that you have to the other people in your family. And he's like, and that is basically like the most important part. And he's like, that's really when marriages start to like fall apart. And he's like, and it's just a ton of work. It's not always about you. And I think that's sort of the issue is like, even within their dynamic of Shreve and Beth, like they don't really empathize a lot with each other, at least not until the end.
Yeah, I can agree with that take. Yeah, so moving on a little bit, unless you want to keep digging deeper.
No, we're good.
One of the things with this film is that this is the tricky part with an ensemble cast, is that there's some storylines where I go like, eh. So one of the ones I'm going to mention briefly is the Billy and Barbara one. So Billy's the character that comes to visit Eddie, right? He's that like he's how we get the story moving is like he's visiting Eddie for his wedding.
Is
or
Billy the
whatever.
friend?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, but then like he has that like thing with Barbara where like I guess they slept together and then she's pregnant, and at the end like they try to leave it on a bow. But like my whole point is that like this is one of the reasons I docked the movie, because like I barely remember that storyline, and I was like, what is this adding? Like,
It was
other
just a little
scenes,
blip.
like, yeah.
It's because like what it was trying to show was the dude who's in the friend zone but really wants to be more than friends. He was like the lifelong friend zone, and then they got drunk and slept together. She got pregnant, right? Which I've heard like similar stories before, and then like Billy wants more, and she doesn't really want more with him, and then it just creates this really awkward dynamic. Because really, what it's starting to show at that point is that, what's her name's Barbara, right?
Yeah.
That was sort of the beginning of what's called the archetypical like career woman at that point. Like she wasn't really about like starting a family. She was really focused on her career.
Yeah, but they seem to like kind of hint that they're gonna get together at the end, right?
Yeah,
Well, at least,
it's a movie, so they got to make it seem rosy, right? In reality, life is way more complicated than that.
No, I agree. It's just
and
that,
relationships are way more complicated.
Like I understand like your point, like you got more, like that's actually a good point. Like to me, like it didn't even register in my brain. I was just like, this is such a minor storyline. Like, why is it in here?
But that's what it was. Like it was because she was she was sort of like a broadcasting assistant. I don't even know exactly what her role was, but yeah. And then she always viewed him as a friend, but I don't know. I guess there was a little bit more there. But then she wanted to pull back after they've already slept together. It's like, well, already crossed that line, right? Yeah. And so he's like, and then that was interesting. It was he really wanted to marry her, and he's like, I don't want to just marry you just because we have a kid. And then it was interesting because he wants to be like a part of the kid's life, and she kind of does and kind of doesn't. I don't know. She seems very like all over the place, a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I just thought that like, I mean, it was
to your point, they didn't really flesh that out a whole lot. That storyline.
But that's a good point about the friend zone. I just it didn't cross my mind because
right, it's total. They said they had been friends for 6 years, and then that happened.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point because to me it was just like it seemed like a drunken mistake, and like I said, like he has more feelings, she doesn't. But it's tricky also because of the time period, right? Like this is an easy out for her, right? She can.
Well, so I will say to this: at that point in time, if you knock somebody up, it was taboo. Or like you were basically forced to be like, "That's it, you're marrying this person."
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just how society was at that point. Whereas today, we've gone the opposite way.
Yeah, it's deviated.
Where it's like, nah, just like, don't worry about it. You got a kid. Like either you could be a single mom or a single dad. It's no problem.
Or you go to the clinic.
Yeah. Oh, I'm saying if you're gonna have the kid.
Oh yeah. That's a good point. Let's see. Let's see another interesting scene. So again, we're jumping around, but remember that scene where they end up in jail, and what causes them to go to jail is because that
was my favorite. That was one of my favorite scenes when he's with the Holy Family.
Yeah, they're messing the nativity scene. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, Fenwick was, and he didn't have any pants on.
Yeah.
Dude, he just was taking all of his energy off on the wise men. I was like, bro, you don't have to do that to the wise men. Just knocking them over.
Pretty much, dude. And then he doesn't get bailed out. But the that nativity scene, I was just like, okay, this movie is such a. It's an 80s. It's funny how like what I got out of this movie too is that. You know how like we see movies today and there's nostalgia to the 80s or even or different decades.
Yeah, there's nostalgia to the 50s at that point.
Yeah. No, but also like how the film style, right? Like even how you do the nostalgia, right? If you look at like a La La Land, like how they did the 50s in that movie.
I never saw La La Land.
The only thing I'm trying to make a point here is that like it's a different style. It's like a more modern style. And like this is an 80s movie. Basically, it's an 80s movie trying to portray the 50s, which is what I kind of like got out of it too. I was like, that's interesting, right? We don't often think of movies like, it's a nostalgia film of the 50s, but it's like made with 80s style, writing, directing, et cetera, et cetera. while we have like the same now, like we have movies that are like set in the 50s, 80s, whatever, but it's modern style writing, you know, techniques, you know, and you can still see the slight differences, right? Because if you didn't know it was set in the 50s and with the style and stuff, and like dialogue and et cetera, it still feels like an 80s movie in many ways. So, right, if you watch like Risky Business or Ferris Bueller's Day Off, et cetera, like feels like an 80s movie, right? So it's like an 80s movie that's like transporting you back to the 50s, which I find interesting in this style. But yeah, the nativity scene, I just want to bring it up because it's a funny scene and it's they end up in jail for it. But and I think we could start making headway towards like the final third, right? So there's this other subplot with Boogie doing the side bets we've mentioned, and like the
I think another scene that was interesting that we didn't really touch upon was that who was it? Shreve. No, I'm sorry. You're right. Boogie was the one who was the compulsive gambler, ends up in a lot of debt. And so Fenwick tells him he'll try to bail him out. And he goes and talks to his brother. And there's a lot of tension there. I don't know if you wanted to speak on that a little more.
I remember that scene. I don't know if you want to dig out of that. I was moving to Boogie's like, you know, betting and like how he like there's scenes where like he has to beat the bookie and all that stuff. That was like okay, but I remember talking about like the Fenwick asking for the and the brother, I don't think he's named, refuses to lend him money. Yeah.
One thing I will say is oftentimes when the 50s and 40s are talked about, especially because like my parents grew up in that, like they were kids of that. There's often this like over-idealized sense of simplicity and perfection from that time period. I don't know if you get that too, or if you've come across that sort of. It's interesting that like when you hear older people talk about it, it's like they're looking through that like rose-colored glasses, right? That era. And what I appreciate about this film is they show there's still a lot of complexity, same issues, right? Society hasn't necessarily changed in that way because people are people. And so what I will say is that at least with this film, right, with all the characters and specifically with Fenwick, you know, he's a college dropout, doesn't really know what he wants to do, right? And there's still a lot of anxiety with kids, I would say, in today's day and age. I think it's even gotten more so. And they were just showing that, you know, all family dynamics are not necessarily perfect during that era either, because there's obviously a lot of contempt for between the two siblings at that point. So I appreciated this sort of authenticity of like not trying to over idealize that era within this film, right? They still show complex family dynamics.
Yeah,
even
I mean, to add
those families were more nuclear.
To add on to that, there's that scene where Eddie's all nervous about marriage, right? Like, and being a virgin, right? Like, if you think about it, right? Like, to your point about this rose-colored glasses of the 50s, who I've only really seen that from a certain group of people in this country. I'll say that, but
I've heard of it before for some people in the older gen. I'm like, all right, guys.
Yeah. And I guess that includes older people, but I think also like certain life philosophy. I know. But when Eddie and Boogie are talking to the diner, right? That's other thing too, right? This film is called Diner because like a lot of important scenes happen at the diner. I love diners, by the way.
That's their meetup spot. Is the diner?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, we all had our own diners growing up, right? But the
yeah, bro. For us in high school, it was
John Mice Park. Dude.
Yeah, man. It was pickup basketball.
Yeah, I feel like we were at that park like a lot of times.
And it's like every day after school.
Yeah, I was just like, I think other people like went other places, and we were always at John Mice Park, dude.
It was the same crew.
But yeah, sorry, going back to the Eddie and Boogie scene, right? Eddie's nervous because he hasn't like, you know, and this is something that hasn't changed, right? Like the whole like sow your oats mentality, right? Like, I think this is a very Americanized thing because I've interacted with people who are first generation immigrants from other countries, and they don't have the same hookup. It's like first person they like. It's kind of like the real old.
Well, it's way more conservative.
Yeah, way more conservative. Like the first person they like or the second person they like, they kind of marry, and they kind of have a goal of getting married.
Well, that's how it was in like I would say the 30s and 40s here.
Exactly. I think I think the 50s are interesting because it's still there, but at the same time, you could see, like you said, you see
they're starting to change.
You see the seeds planted that it's changing, right? We'll get to the 60s, and when we're all like looking back, right? But we'll
free love and all that in the 60s, 70s.
We'll get back to the, you know, we're looking back, but like, but Eddie has this like normal, which I think is still today, right? A guy like, let's say, you know, he has had, let's say, like so and so dating success, I could see him, like that person having the same kind of worries. They're like, oh, am I settling? There's another film that we'll be doing in the future who has a similar theme, of the sow your oats mentality. But I gotta say, this is maturity now, because I would say that when I was younger, I could see myself thinking this way, but now with more maturity, I see that like in the end, like, that kind of thing is so childish. For like, if you're just in a good spot in your life, then you have nothing else to worry about. You just keep going.
Yeah, why? But that's the insecurity that he has, right?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like those
Look,
insecurities.
I mean, he's lived his life up to that point, and then he kind of wonders, well, what if that I miss out on a certain other aspect?
Yeah,
and I think that's just some of the existential questions of growing up.
Yeah, and but I wanted to pile on your point about like the 1950s weren't just this era of like, oh, I got married young and I was so happy, I was so great. Like they had they had second thoughts, issues. Yeah. But like you said, like often in history or when we are mainstream culture digest things, right? It has to simplify things and create a narrative, right? So, but I thought outside of
there's always this nostalgia for the past or a more simple time.
Yeah, I will say that outside of the
I was. Just real quick before you go, there was a group message or like messenger I was a part of where someone was looking at nostalgia, like hating on today's era, looking at nostalgia towards the 90s. It was much more simple. It was more, I was like, bro, we had plenty of problems in the 90s too. I was like, and I'm not saying today's better. I was like, there's certain things that like I'm grateful for in the 2020s that we didn't have in the 90s. I don't miss dial-up. Yeah, like I'm great for like certain things like that.
Yeah, I think I forgot what I was gonna say, but I think I was just
sorry for cutting you off.
I think I was just piling on like that point about like the rose-colored glasses, but oh no, I was gonna finish off was that like in this film I found basically like there's some funny scenes and joke scenes, but like to me like the two real scenes that really stuck with me were like the Eddie and Boogie scene with the virginity, sow your oats dilemma, and then the Shrivy and Beth, the record player scene. I think those two scenes by themselves, like, I can see why on YouTube these are scenes that like people have uploaded by themselves and like people watch and discuss, because I think those are good. Like we're doing it now, right? Those are good conversation points because those are like, I think those are timeless. And I will say like, we'll get to ratings when we'll wrap up, but and we'll get to that ending. I do want to discuss that ending, which I found kind of like unique for a ensemble, let's say young adult type of movie. But I will say that like those two scenes, they do stick out, and I can see why this movie is still discussed today as like a niche classic, because I don't think we see a lot of movies where that has like kind of like it touches upon that aspect now. Especially, I think it's gonna become less and less as I think our films are becoming more and more about like different narratives, and that's fine, right? Different stories need to be told, but I don't think we're going to see a future diner anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything else you wanted to touch upon?
Yeah, I guess we should get to the. I guess you did mention already the crazy Boogie Beth wig ending, and then we mentioned the betting, which basically he gets bailed out by who bails him out again?
It was one of his dad's friends.
Yeah, the bookie doesn't beat the crap out of him. There's a random scene where he gets punched, but like we can skip that.
Yeah, so I guess what's interesting is like in the end, like you were saying, Boogie, he says he'll work with his dad's friend until he pays off the debt. But what did he say? He's like still trying to find what he's passionate about, basically.
Yeah, which is actually a lot of people, like when they go to college, a lot of people don't know what they want to do, and then they just kind of like fail up, as I would say, right? Fail into a position or a role, and then they have money, and it keeps them satisfied. But then later, as the years rack up, they start having those doubts and thought process.
The only difference is you sort of screwing around in college back then doesn't put you in the financial straits that it does today.
Oh yeah, that's a big difference.
College has definitely gotten way more expensive since the 50s.
Yeah. So what I will say is that we should probably discuss the wedding scene, and then we can do final thoughts and ratings. So the ending of this film is pretty much the.
Dude, I love how he chose Colt's colors. I was dying a little bit.
Yeah. It was all cult theme, right? Like even the song I think is cult theme, right? And so the
Yeah.
scene is like is actually kind of memorable, right? Because it's the football stuff. But I think even how it was shot, right? Like I think they're all like there's some dialogue, but really like there's a heartfelt speech by Modell. I forgot what was in the speech, but it was actually pretty good. I think it was about like growing up, friendship. It was kind of like, the cliches, like what's the term, like cheesy cliches. But like in this kind of movie, I expected it. The cheesy cliches of no matter of life, what twists and turns will always be a crew type of thing. Right, like people do change in their lives, right? But like your friends are still your friends. And then I think also the one of the posters is that final scene shot, right, where they're all dressed up in the wedding, like kind of like suits, and like they're all sitting at that table. And then I think a bouquet is thrown. I don't know where it lands. Oh, I think it lands on their table. But yeah, I want to get your thoughts on the ending, because I think for a slice of life, or I'll call it, like film, this is an ending where I think I'm not really going to forget, just because like it was kind of unique in nature. The shooting, the theme, like it was kind of like nothing crazy happened, but it's like I'm not gonna, like you said, like the cult theme, like it just seemed like had a little details
so bizarre,
that,
dude.
yeah,
but
little details that like make it unforgettable, which is like weird.
I mean, basically, it was sort of the cliche where like everyone's dancing with one another. What was it? Shreve and his wife sort of like they come to an understanding, talk about how they're going to vacation in the Poconos. Obviously, that they reconciled a little bit. Billy and Barbara are dancing. Like everything's kind of like a little cliche, kind of happy. And then at the end, it was the bouquet toss where the group that's all at a table. The bouquet lands on their table, and then that was kind of it.
Yeah,
like it was fitting. I'll give you that.
Yeah, it's like, how like some movies can't land the ending. Actually, many movies can't. I thought this one, as imperfect as the movie was, it landed it, and I'm like, okay, I gotta respect that.
Yeah, that's fair.
But anyways, yeah. Now we gotta get into that rating stuff. So I know you got a lot of thoughts.
Do you want me to go ahead first?
Yeah, well, that's the tradition we have now, right? Yeah, I picked it, so you go first. So.
Yeah, I mean, it was this film was a slice of life type of movie, looking at a specific era. I respected the sort of honesty and the different character dynamics that they had from dudes with different perspectives, right? Some were married, like I said at the beginning, some were single, some were engaged. And it was interesting their sort of take of citing the 80s looking back at the 50s, like you were saying, because it was definitely done differently than we would look back at the 50s today. I thought the pace was good. There was definitely a lot of humor. I thought that, the dynamic between Billy and Barbara was a little sort of out of place. There were scenes that didn't necessarily have to be in the film, like they didn't add too much necessarily to it, but they sort of included certain things, just because they had to flesh it out. A lot of this was just like individual moments that were kind of like pieced together. It wasn't always the most cohesive script, but it was more meant as a comedy, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be insanely like, the tightest script. That being said, I did find certain scenes funny, and I think it shows how far society has come in terms of like male female relations, especially because like we discussed earlier, some of what would be considered the male banter for that point is definitely not acceptable today. So I thought it was interesting. It was a cool sort of nostalgia movie. But I don't know if there was anything that it really added or that I took away from this, because I've seen other films that were from the 50s. So for me, I'd have to give it a 6.5.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think my issue with the movie, and because you watched it more recently than me, is that I actually had a hard time, other than the scenes that I liked. So the one like the Eddie and Boogie in the diner, the record club scene, the nativity scene, the Fenwick with the car. I had a hard time thinking of other scenes that I liked, and like also like you said.
Yeah, I mean the record scene obviously stuck out to me.
Yeah, and then also like how they all like you said, they all tied together at the end because they're at the wedding and they're all reconciling, but like the threads were all weird. There's even the scene where what's his name? Boogie's doing the horse, right? He rides a horse with the Carol or whatever, right? Or I forgot.
Oh yeah, they go. That was so like.
Yeah, so it just seems
unnecessary.
it seems sporadic, and so me, like I don't like either make the movie longer, flush it out more, make it a 3 hour or 2.5, or cut stuff out, right? And so I'm kind of cutthroat on that. I have issues when films tend to like just put things in because maybe often you read that like the writers or director just like certain scenes and they want to fit it in there.
Mm-hmm.
They fight the studio on like what they cut out. Because like I often like I've agreed with the director's cut, but I've seen a couple in films where I'm like the director's cut was worse. I actually like the original cut. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Like Watchmen is a great example I have where like just watch the original cut. The director's cut doesn't add that much, in my opinion. And I will say is that like to your point, I remember watching like obviously it's a different theme and scenario. It's high school Breakfast Club, but that movie I remember more the scenes than this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's other 80s movies that I've seen that I like they stick out in my mind a little bit more than this one. This one I see going down as like a niche classic that I think it's good to watch it, but I don't know really if I'm going to rewatch this anytime soon, or even other than the record player scene. I don't think I'm going to or maybe the two scenes, the Eddie scene, the ones I like the most, right? The Eddie scene in the diner and the record player one. There's not really much like those are by themselves are great scenes. So I can pull them out of YouTube, right? But I'm not going to say like, I'm not so sure I would say like, I'm sorry to clarify my point. I'm not so sure I would say watch the whole movie versus me just sending them the clips. That's what I'm trying to get.
Yeah.
And so I came in with a pretty, what I consider a standard score for myself, 6 out of 10. And yeah, that's kind of like my version of 7 for most people. So I came in at 6. I thought the movie was watchable. I thought the length wasn't too bad. You're right. The pace wasn't terrible. It's just like when I look back, having seen it like way before you have, I can only pick out the 3 things I kind of like really took away with that. And those are just individual moments, right? Like it's not like a movie where I go, you need to watch the whole thing back to front. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I always have to be a little harsher on movies like that. So
no, that's
yeah.
Well, anyway, yeah. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, it was a good episode.
Cool. Well, if you enjoyed our commentary on this week's film, Diner, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you have any requests for films in the future, please be sure to let us know in the comment section, and we'll try to get to them. But anyway, stay tuned for next week's episode, and we're out.